Okay, so I'm going to start this off by talking about where we see the organic market in the United States at a little bit of a higher level in terms of kind of where we see the market growing right now, where we see the opportunities for growth within the organics in the U.S. So the OTA put out these numbers, I think at the end of last year, talking about how large the organic market has reached in the United States. And I think they estimated in 2017 we had about $45 billion worth of sales in the organic sector, which is pretty good. It's about twice the growth rate that we saw in the overall food sales. So overall sales grew by about 3%, organic grew by about 6%. But one of the pessimistic things that you can see from these numbers is it's declining in terms of the rate of growth, and it's been declining for a few years. And if we look at how large the overall food segment is in the United States, $1.6 trillion, if we're really talking about expanding organic and changing the way things are produced and continuing to grow this industry, 6% growth ain't cutting it. And if we see this thing fall down to 4%, 3%, then we're just keeping up with the Joneses. We're not really expanding the market. So, I know everybody's talked about all these optimistic things about production, and I'm here to spread bad news. I'm an economist. I apologize. It's in my training. So, two numbers I would really like to focus on to start, and the ones that I think impact you guys the most directly are eggs and meat and poultry. Somebody asked me why fish is on there. So I've been looking for the organic tilapia farmer. Is anybody here an organic tilapia farmer? No, I don't think so. I haven't found them yet. So if you'd let me know who that is, I'm not sure where the organic fish comes from. But you see that those two industries, those two groupings together, they grew by about 9%, which is pretty good. About $7.6 billion in sales. The reason that I like to focus on those is those are the primary sources of demand for organic crops right now. Your corn, your wheat, your soybeans, things like that are primarily going to animal feed in the United States. Also, whenever you look at things like packaged foods and beverages, grains and breads, there's a lot of marketing and value add and stuff that goes into that. So the growth in those doesn't really trickle down to you guys as directly as it does in the meat and the dairy and the eggs. But what's interesting is, so that grew by 9%. Well, if we look at what's going on with organic acreage, we see that we only had 2% growth in acres for corn, wheat, and soybeans in the U.S. in 2018. Well, if we've got 9% growth in the market itself, but acres are only expanded by 2%, and honestly, organic acreage looks pretty good, especially if you compare it to conventional. Conventional guys are struggling. They basically hit the demand limit on biofuels. Exports aren't what they used to be. There's just a lot of bad news right there. We've had good growth in organic, but only 2% in terms of growth of acreage for corn, wheat, and soybeans in 2018. Well, if livestock and dairy sales are selling at 9% growth, why are we only seeing 2% growth in acreage? Where's that feed coming from? Well, one of the big things that we have going on in organic right now that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with is trade. There's been a lot of questions about what's valid organic imports, what's invalid organic imports. There's a lot of speculation there, and I'm not going to delve into speculation on it. But what I can tell you is, if we look at what's going on with imports, looking at corn in particular, corn imports are still substantial. They're 26% of U.S. supplies, if you include cracked corn. But it's growing as a share, or it's shrinking as a share, rather, and shrinking as a total volume. Actually, we're seeing organic corn production in the United States catch up to demand. And that's part of the situation is consumer demand has gotten ahead of the organic industry. We've expanded the demand for things like yogurts and chicken and things like that faster than we've expanded the feed source. So in essence, we've created a hole that has been filled by imports. But we're catching up with corn. However, if we look at what's going on with soybeans, not only is it growing as a share, it's growing as an absolute volume. If you include soybean meal, which is a big deal right now, we imported about 75% of our needs last year for soybeans. That's absolutely ridiculous. That's supplies that could be and should be sourced from domestic production, but they're not being. And the question is why? Why are we not sourcing those domestically? There's a lot of things that are wrong with the soybean market. Part of it, I'm sure you guys know, soybeans are a terrible crop to grow, and they don't pay that well. So what we see is, on top of the fact that we're importing more soybeans, what we're actually seeing is whole soybean imports, they're actually on the decline. It's soybean meal that's growing. Well, why is soybean meal growing? It's for animal feed. And we have an issue where they don't want organic soybean oil. There's no market for it in the United States. And so what we're seeing is importers are increasingly turning towards soybean meal, turning away from whole soybeans, essentially so they don't have to deal with the oil issue because there's not much of a market for organic soybean oil. Now, there are markets for other organic oils. We import a whole bunch of organic canola oil, a whole bunch of organic sunflower oil. There's just virtually no market for organic soybean oil. It's very small. So part of what we see as one of the issues going on within the organic agriculture sector is developing these markets. How do we maybe develop a market for organic soybean oil? Who can we get as our consumers for those products? Some top line numbers that I kind of came up with, and these are my estimates based on the best data I can get my hands on. I'd love to hear if this looks like anything you guys are seeing. If we look at the profitability or the revenue per acre that you get from corn versus soybeans, soybeans don't pay out. Well, if you're importing all this meal, and meal's going for a very good premium, and you're not getting it bid back into the beans because of oil, there's just no incentive to grow soybeans. Farmers don't like to grow them. They're not a good crop. They don't pay very well. So what can we do to maybe change this situation? Well, if we look at the opportunity that lies within the soybean situation in the United States, if we are able to shrink our imports, and this is just off of 2017-18 imports, if we continue to see demand grow at 6%, 8%, these numbers will just keep getting bigger. But if we just look at 17-18, we see that if we were able to shrink our imports down just the size of corn, that's the opportunity to add about 390,000 more acres of soybeans, or grow organic field crops by 13% just in closing that supply gap alone. But I don't think that's really the solution that we need, because there's a lot of issues with growing soybeans. There's not a good market for it. Part of what we see going on is we're starting to see a collision of two sides in the market. To continue to grow organic demand in that sector so that we can get a bigger slice of that $1.4 billion or trillion dollar pool of food sales in the United States, we need to buy in of bigger organizations, the Purdue's, the Smithfields, people like that. They have to become a part of the industry. But part of the problem is they are a monoculture system. They're used to feeding chickens corn and soybeans because that's what they know how to do and that's what's efficient. So what they need is they need a paradigm shift in the way that they think about feeding things, in the way that they think about production. We need to be able to move this industry past feeding corn and soybeans and feeding other feed rations and coming up with different ways of creating these markets. We need to move these acres not into soybeans, but into other things like sunflower, like peas, like oats, and find ways to diversify these feed rations. How you get these producers, these large livestock and poultry producers to shift how they're producing stuff, that's a really hard question, and I don't really know the answer to it. But it is a major situation, and that is the opportunity right now within agriculture, within organics, is we need to start moving these people away from the feeding mechanisms and the feeding styles that they're doing now and start closing these import gaps by demanding the stuff that fits within an organic rotation that's good for the soil and it generates profits for farmers. Thanks.